I'm Jim Collison, and live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska, as well as our office in Sydney, Australia. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on November 12th, 2019. Called to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you are listening live, we'd love to have you join us in our chat room. Many of you already have, so thanks for doing that. Link above the video window on our live page. If you have questions after the fact, you can always send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Ann Lingenfelter is our host today. She works as a learning solutions consultant here at Gallup with me. And Ann, always great to see you. Welcome back to another Call to Coach.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here. We're having a truly Australian day today in Australia, in Sydney. If you live in Omaha, then you have school canceled for snow days, right? We have 750 schools that are closed today because of catastrophic bushfire danger. Wow. That is a true sign of the times here in Australia. So anyway, our thoughts and minds are going out to all those who are out there battling those blazes today. My guest is Michelle Eason, and Michelle is the Director of Organizational Development for Justice Health and Forensic Mental Health Network. She works with individuals and teams on using their strengths to help them succeed and bring more joy into their working lives. She is a registered nurse specializing in mental health and held previous senior roles of Director of Nursing and Clinical Nurse Consultant in forensic mental health contexts. She's also a lecturer at the School of Psychiatry at the University of New South Wales. As a director of the Justice Health Forensic Mental Health Network Board, she promotes the use of positive psychology and a strengths-based approach to systems and processes at a strategic level. She has a keen interest in the facilitation of practice development and leadership with a focus on strengths. She also provides individual and team strengths coaching and integrates strengths approaches into development workshops and strategic planning. And of course, she is a Gallup certified strengths coach. Her top 5 are strategic, futuristic, ideation, empathy, and communication. Michelle, welcome to Call to Coach.
Thanks. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Jim. Nice to be here.
We're pleased you could join us. As we set the stage for all the folks who are tuning in or listening to the recorded version, we'd love for you to set the stage a bit and help us understand the world at which you operate in. I talked a little bit about it in the introduction, but can you give us a bit more color to that, Michelle?
Yeah, of course. So Justice Health Forensic Mental Health Network, which is a very big title. So Justice Health provides healthcare services to 3 different types of groups. So those people who are in custody. So we have healthcare providers at over 50 correctional centres and juvenile detention centres across New South Wales. So quite spread, quite far and quite deep. And some of them are actually quite heavily impacted by the fires at the moment. We are providing care for about 13,000 people in custody at any one time. And we also provide care in the community. So we have health staff in the courts. So in about 38 courts across New South Wales, so adult courts and children's courts, diverting mentally ill people away from custody. And we work in the community at the other end of the spectrum in terms of helping people transition back into the community, helping them with some wraparound services around housing and employment. So transitioning people out of custody into the community. And we have inpatient services where we have inpatient hospital that's part of the custodial environment, but we also have a standalone health facility which is just health-led, 135-bed forensic mental health unit, and we're part of a broader forensic mental health network. So we provide services to quite a vulnerable group of people. We have high representation of Aboriginal people in custody and who we care for. So 25% of adults and over 50% of the adolescents identifying as Aboriginal. So, and we're just really spread. We've got a really diverse, we're in very diverse areas, and we're spread across the whole of the state.
Okay. So sounds like around 30,000 patients that you guys are looking after within the state in those different environments of inpatient, community, custodial centers. And is it around 1,500 staff that that are working in that area? Is that right?
Yeah, so it's 13,000 patients, not 30,000. But
Oh,
yeah,
right.
it's 1,500 staff. Yeah.
Okay, 1,500 staff. And I'd love to know the kinds of roles that those folks are doing. So I'm assuming some counseling, some doctors, some clinicians. Talk about the variety of roles that you're seeing across the board.
Yeah, so it is a health service. So we have a lot of medical staff, so general practitioners and psychiatrists. We have allied health, so psychology, OTs, diversional therapists. The majority of our workforce is nursing, just because just in terms of numbers. And then we have a whole lot of support services. So we have research services, education and training. So those corporate back-end support services. But on the whole, yeah, allied health, medical and nursing.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that context. I think that helps us understand. Moving on to sort of the big picture, if you don't mind starting there, the big picture of the relationship and partnership you have with Gallup. How did it begin? What was the interest and that you decided to partner with us, and then we'll start to dig down a bit into what that looks like.
Okay. So yeah, I was first introduced to the Strength Finder assessment through a leadership development course that New South Wales Health were running, and we were invited to take the assessment, and really we sort of had a superficial conversation about that, and I sort of just parked that and put it away, and a colleague said to me several months later that I would find it interesting because I do lots of coaching. It might add some value to my coaching. So I started looking at the Call to Coach and the Theme Thursdays and the stuff that's available on the web, and got a real interest. Was really lucky to be supported to do the strength, the accreditation, the strengths coaching, and that would just lit a fire. And so from there, we started to really start to integrate it into our training and our programs. So that it became part of the courses that we were running, and we were complementing that with coaching and workshops around sort of strengths discovery. But it was quite an organic way in which we were doing it, and we were kind of just working with teams that were coming to us and ask. And we made a decision that we wanted to, we were getting to a point where we wanted to take a much more structured and use it as a bit more of a cultural anchor. And that's when we really started having conversations with Gallup. So we're really lucky to work with Claire and Chirag at Gallup Sydney, and really helped us in terms of, we use the 7 strategies for building strength-based organisations and strength-based cultures, and that really helped us put some structure around what we were doing. And the other thing that we did, I think, which made the big difference from shift between us doing it at a sort of really organic and individual ad hoc way, was we shifted our language. So we started to align it with our strategic directions, building a values-based, providing a values-based model of care, having an engaged and talented workforce. So we started to align what we were doing with our strategy, and we started to talk about it as a business strategy, and it really did shift the organisation's view on what we were doing. We'd already engendered some buy-in through that process that we'd started organically. We were very lucky that we had the CE. The CE had some buy-in quite early on. So he did some strengths coaching and has participated in some workshops. So we were really lucky we were able to get the board to endorse it as part of our people at the platform, really, for our people and culture strategy, and really embed it as starting to get that strength-based approach across the network.
Michelle, what do you think was key in getting that that support and buy-in? What was it about it that you think captured that?
Yeah, I think part of the way we did it, in terms of we were working with people that were coming to us and wanting to be involved, was through anecdotal feedback that they were getting from others about the impact. And so I think that sort of ad hoc way of doing it was kind of important in terms, we got some natural buy-in. We got some key people in the organisation, like the chief executive, for instance, who participated but actually found benefit. Some of the teams we were working with were actually able to demonstrate some shifts in their workplace culture and shifts in the way they were doing things. And I think that became quite visible. So we didn't sort of, when we went to implement this as the people and culture strategy, becoming a strength-based organisation, we'd already had a platform and we already had some wins on the board in terms of the impact, and we really did target some influential managers as we were in that organic phase, I suppose.
Okay. Can you talk a bit about some of those anecdotal stories that you mentioned that were coming down that sort of grabbed people's attention and helped indicate that this was working?
Yeah, there's a couple. Yeah, so we were working with several teams that had with their workplace culture. And so we had been asked, as in organisation development, we're asked to go and actually help support some of those teams. And what we found was actually using the Strengths Finder and having some teamwork and some team workshops and some common language around strengths. It actually helped them to have some conversations that they probably weren't being able to have before, or not having them in a very effective way. So what it started to do was give people a common language that they could talk about what they need, what drives them, and the way about they go about their work. But it also allowed them to challenge others' behaviours. But also it was a lot of self-awareness raising. So some of those teams actually shifted around to have become some of our high performers in terms of the two teams that I think that we were working with weren't meeting their KPIs. We're really struggling with retention, and we've been able to working with the Strength as our platform, really able to shift those teams, and now they're actually meeting all their KPIs, they're actually excelling, and they've got no vacancies. So I think it's things like that started to get the attention of some of the senior staff in the organisation.
And how soon after you implemented it did those sorts of results start showing?
That probably took a little bit of time, but I mean, to be honest, for me, what happens quite rapidly is people understanding the way they work. So in those workshops, there's a whole lot of insight that happens in the moment when you're starting to get people to explore their drivers and the way their strengths land. So that there's an instant in terms of just even being able to start those conversations. But I would say it was after those workshops, it was probably 4 to 6 months before they actually started to see some real wins and some real what happens when they were cohesive, and that just built momentum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. I love that you talk about the common language and the value and importance of that. And just like you said at the beginning of the show, when you said that when you were first introduced to Strengths, you started looking for resources that you could draw from, like Theme Thursdays and Called to Coach shows like this. And you know, here at Gallup, we do the same thing, right? I always like to listen to the most recent Call to Coach. I was listening to one, Jim Collison, recently that you did with on a very diverse community within an organization, and you had a person from the organization. It was a manufacturing company in this instance, and an independent coach that was working with them. And they said there that they had 24 different nationalities within this organization, 24 different languages being spoken, and the 25th language was strengths. And that common language that unified all of them was super powerful. And I hear that again, even when you have an environment where you do have largely English speakers, to have that word that means the same thing to whoever hears it is really useful, isn't it? And it's such a simple thing.
Yeah, and it's really powerful. I think it gives people permission to talk about their needs and self-identify in a way that's not threatening in terms of some of their challenges. But yeah, have those conversations. It is so powerful when they start to, I suppose, that sort of claiming and naming, and they really start to take ownership and the team starts to grow. It's really powerful, that common language.
Yeah, I'm very keen to hear what the type of issues are that you most largely face within your staff population. I mean, I would assume there'd be burnout in there and a few other things. But before we go there, if you were to talk about some of the main reasons when you found this tool, you thought, oh, I can see how we can apply it here. I can see how we can use it here. What is your why, right? What was the why when you first started with this? We talk a lot at Gallup about understanding the why, and that we don't want folks to be an assessment-based organization. It's not about just sticking with the assessment, with just the language of strengths. It's about having that strengths mindset that's brought into management and so forth. But for you guys, in the tricky environment that you operate in, what was the big why?
Yeah, it's I think being as a mental health clinician, part of the way in which we work is it a strength-based approach. So it really aligned, particularly with me, in terms of an approach. It worked quite well with patients, but I'd never really applied it to the workforce. I think the why for us was because we've got such a diverse workforce, where all across the state. I think that having a commonality was really important, but we'd had through staff poll surveys and engagement surveys had really identified we had really diverse workplace cultures and really isolated people working in really remote and rural settings. So it was around how do we actually shift the workplace culture. So our engagement levels weren't particularly high. We had some areas for improvement there. So for me, it was a tool to actually what really resonates with the team that I work with and the people that we work with is actually getting joy out of the work that you do. Actually, because the people that work in this organisation, it's a tough job. And the clients that we work for aren't particularly, attractive, and so people come and work here for a whole range of social justice reasons, for a whole range of, reasons that they want to do well by this vulnerable population. But I don't think we often care too much for the staff. And so for me, this was a way that we could integrate those, that we could actually start to look after the well-being of the staff and give them joy in the work that they do, bring back the joy, I think, in some cases, and the connection with the reason that they're here in the first place. So I think probably that's the big why, that, we can work with patients in a strength-based way. Let's look at our staff well-being so that they can actually find the joy in what they do and work with patients in a way that is, improving patient outcomes and their experience.
Can you share some stories with us where joy has been increased because of the work you have done with strengths there in the network?
Yeah. So I can one particular team really struggling again with team dynamics, but some really complicated patients, so complex patients, and were really challenging in terms of the staff being able to manage those patients, in terms of risk of violence, in terms of, all those things you talked about, burnout. So we went in and started to work with that team. There's a high level of conflict in that team. We went in and worked with those teams, and the first thing we did was actually work with them on the strengths, and had a quite a robust couple of days with them working on strengths and how that was playing out with the team. Really powerful when people realise how they're getting in the way of themselves. And, that team had, for example, that team, number one was harmony, number two was empathy. And so helping them actually unpack that was really powerful. And even now when we go back, we kind of kept connected with that team, and we kept going back. They've been able to work with the patients in a different way. So they've really gone back and started to focus on strengths with the patients. And once they started to focus on strength with the patients, they started to see a shift in the patients as well. And so when you go now to that unit, they are feeling connected, they feel purpose, they feel that they can manage these, the situations are still complex and challenging, but feel that they're being able to do that in a much more united way. And that's really powerful to watch that shift in individuals, but in a team. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would imagine burnout would be in addition to this loneliness that you're talking about because of the remote locations and the very diverse cultures. Burnout, I would imagine, would be something. What else? What other sort of whys do you have that you're really aiming this strengths approach at?
So vicarious trauma is another thing we really struggle with in terms of the work that we do. So working with traumatized populations, that's one of the risk factors. So I think what's been really powerful, we are, as part of that, looking at as the business strategy and aligning it with those seven strategies for creating a strength-based culture. We really were able to think about some of the system and the process changes so taking it away a little bit from the individual's understanding self and teams understanding self, and really trying to reorientate the system to come at a strengths-based approach to the way we do business. And so we've been able to work quite successfully in the wellbeing space, which has been really powerful in terms of we've been able to implement a mindfulness program. We've been able to implement other support structures and programs looking at coming at a strengths-based approach. We've been able to work with areas like our workforce team and our governance team to reframe actually the way that we think about the work that we do. Simple things like, rather than talking about, bullying and harassment is a challenge. It can be a challenge, but rather than trying to sort of stamp out bullying and harassment, we've reframed the way we're talking about that, and we started talking about promoting positive workplace cultures. And the difference in the shift in language has been really powerful. We've stopped talking about what we can't do and what we can do, and it's really those kind of things seem so simple, but the impact that they're actually having is significant in terms of people's way they work.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that sometimes we talk about with clients that you can have a strengths-based approach even prior to rolling out the assessment, right? So it is a bit of a flip of the mental switch there, as how you see things and how you approach things, and leading with positive intent. Obviously, the common language is important, and that's where the assessment comes in. But it's certainly more than just the assessment. We say that a lot, but I think sometimes if people haven't walked through it the way you have in a very strategic way, they're not really sure what that looks like. So when you think about things like, I noticed when I looked at your email signature that you have your values, the network's values on your email signature. So when you think about how you're going to impact those with strengths and even with engagement, which is another conversation for us to have today, how does that impact those values that you guys live day in and day out?
Yeah, I actually, again, I think it just complements. I think it becomes part of the conversation. I think we've done a lot of work with our organisational values. We went round and we consulted with every single team in our organisation to ask them what was important to them and how did they what was important to them in being able to feel like they can contribute their best at work, and what kind of things needed to be in place. And so those were the values that got distilled down from those conversations. So for me, the staff owning those values is really important. And then that just allows us, we integrate those in every conversation that we're having about strengths, particularly in our workshops, to try and embed them. And the other thing that our recognition and reward strategy is really anchored to those values. So we recognise people for demonstrating those values as part of our program. So I think that's been really powerful.
Okay. Before we move to Q12, let's talk about sort of the nuts and bolts of how it works. So if you were to say to someone in your elevator pitch about how you use strengths at the network, sort of, on a day-to-day basis, what does it look like? How many folks do you have driving the initiative? How many certified coaches do you have? I know you've alluded to this 7 strategies, which Gallup has provided previously, different, which are sort of suggestions about ways to roll out a strengths program. But of course, it's not a one size fits all sort of approach. But if you were to say in a nutshell what it looks like, your strength strategy there, how would you say that?
I'm not good at nutshells, Anne, but I think what I would say, and look, I think I have to preface that as part of our strategic planning, this is a 2018 to 2022 initiative. So we are moving along with that. We have over 500 staff that have completed their Strength Finder assessment, and all of them have had one-on-one coaching. I think what I would say about that is we made a very, when we started to be very strategic about this, we made a very clear decision that we would not invest in giving people the Strength Finder assessment as a tokenistic thing. We want it to be lived. We want it to be embedded. We want it to be part of the way we do business. So we talk about it at orientation. It's very clear from the first time people get in our organisation that we're a strengths-based organisation and this is what we do. We show them some data and some information around strengths. It's very much anchored in the way that we're doing business. So it's starting to become, and we're getting better and better at this, but it's starting to become the lens in which we make decisions. And that is really powerful to see that at the executive and the board table, when people start actually catching themselves and saying, actually, let's look at a strengths-based approach to this. So we're really starting to drive strengths to make our decisions about the way we do business. And the other thing that I think that we've done, this is not very nutshell, the other thing that I think that we've done is we structured, and I think this will lead into the Q12 conversation, but we structured it around a 12-week process program. So we made a deliberate decision to cascade it from the top. So we worked with our CE and the executive leadership team, and there's a 12-week process that we're cascading down. So we've gone across and down. And what's powerful is when your manager understands the language and can name and aim, then they can reinforce this is the way we do business. And that's been that's been powerful for us. And we've got this 12-week program, which includes the strengths discovery and the strengths engagement and the Q12. And that, again, is giving local teams ownership of that. And a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people are taking that and really thinking about the way they do business in the strengths approach. So we're getting it at that micro and that macro level.
So if you have someone within a team who doesn't, is skeptical or just doesn't buy into it, then does the manager just manage them or coach them from a different approach?
Yeah, I think they still try and use quite a strengths-based approach, and we've definitely had that because we made a decision not to make it mandatory, that this was an opt-in. This was an opt-in. We really haven't come up against much resistance because I think what's happening is when people are seeing the power of it coming down. We have had some people who have been reluctant to do the Strength Finder assessment, and what we've done is include them in the conversation and get them to think about what their strengths are, and the managers are still working with them in terms of forget the words. We're still going to talk about what do you like to do, what do you do well, how do I get the best out of you. So the language around it is absolutely still there. And I've found, in fact, some of those people get so intrigued in the workshops and realise that it's not about what they thought it was about, and they opt in later.
Yeah, absolutely. And how many folks do you have, would you say, driving it officially within the organization? How many coaches do you have?
So we have 5 accredited coaches, and we've had 5 more people go through and are working towards that. So it's a lot of work for 5 of us. But what we did, again, one of those steps in the strategies was creating a strengths community. And that's been, I have to say, that's been really powerful. So anyone who showed a particular interest or a desire to learn more about this, we've kind of brought them in. And the strengths community kind of isn't committee. It's a group of people that meet together, and we've been able to influence quite a lot when we start talking about the things that we can take back to the table when we're in meetings. And so there's probably about 25, 30 people that step in and out of that. But it's been quite organic, but I have to say that they are a powerful group of people because they're all representing this at different tables. But we've been able to change quite a lot through that strengths community.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent.
And can I jump in real quick? There's a quick question from Nate in the chat room. He had mentioned, Michelle, can you walk us through the decision-making process? You had mentioned maybe at the exec level, starting to think more strengths-based. And that's easy to say, maybe a little bit harder to do sometimes. Maybe an example or just talk a little bit more about that, especially at the exec level, if you can.
Yeah. Look, I think some of this is going to sound really simplistic. But for example, some of the survey data that we got back was around the fact, was around favoritism and some stuff around racism as part of a whole suite of public sector questionnaires. And the jump was to talk about how do we get rid of favoritism and how do we eradicate racism. And quite quickly at that table, the conversation was shifted by other members to say, well, let's take a strengths-based approach to this. What is it that we want? What is it we want people to do? So the conversation said, how do we become diverse? And how do we value diversity and inclusion? What does that start to look like then? And so rather than put a strategy in place that was, we're going to do this to get rid of favoritism, we put a strategy in place around how do we promote diversity and inclusion, and it changed the conversation. It changed the outcome, and the impact actually having those conversations is really helpful with the managers and really powerful with them because they can see what they can do, and no one feels like they're being criticised, and no one feels. But it's coming at things with a strength-based approach. Does that make sense? Like it sounds really simple, but someone in the executive team just saying, well, let's flip this.
Michelle,
is interesting.
Do you find that accelerates the decision-making process, or does it slow it down? Or
I think it accelerates it, Jim, because I think people are looking for then what we can do. And I've again the other thing that I see happening, which is again really powerful, rather than saying, oh, we can't do that, and then them being a whole conversation around that, it's, well, what can we do then? That's fine if we can't do that. Let's just leave it there. What actually can we do? And so people, it's a real shift to a can-do mentality, and it is changing the way we make decisions. Does that make sense? Probably doesn't answer Nate's question, but in terms of some of the way it's shifting things. Yeah,
well, especially when we think about what are we good at, and how do we take then what we're good at and make more of it, or if we know this industry or we know these things and we're really good at this, how do we replicate that using those things we already know and we do very, very well? And so that's what I hear you saying. Does that accurately represent? Okay,
that was much better summarized.
No, I am a nutshell kind of guy, so that kind of works out nicely. And you wanted to talk a little bit about Q12, and I want to leave some time for that, so I'll let you guys switch to that as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. No, look, I know when we talk about those different strategies for bringing strengths in, one of the things we talk about is weaving it into the day-to-day and the other things that are getting done in an organization. For most organizations, measuring employee engagement is something that needs to happen. Of course, in your world, public sector world, you're going to have the state mandated People Matter survey. So that's out there. Why did you decide to go ahead and bring Q12 in addition to the People Matter survey?
There was something about the simplicity of the Q12. The other thing it was simplicity in terms of completing it. I think it's quite complex in terms of looking for what sits under that. That's a different conversation. But also the rapid, the quick turnaround time was really important for us, and it aligned with strengths. So it aligned with something that we'd already invested in, and for me, it was just the next level in terms of starting to demonstrate impact. It was a mechanism for us to start to demonstrate impact.
Okay. So how did you use it, or how do you use it?
Yeah, we made a decision we made a decision early on that because we had the big snapshots organisational wide for the People Matters, the public survey engagement data, that we would try a different approach. And so what we do as part of that 12-week process that I was talking about, the teams do their Strength Finder and their Q12 in the first sort of week. We then follow them all up with one-on-one coaching. We then have Strengths Discovery, which is a 3 or 4 hour workshop. And then the second workshop is a Strengths Engagement workshop where we actually work with the team and we talk about engagement and the power of engagement. And we have conversations with them about their Q12 results. So it's really at a local level. And we start to work with those teams around what's sitting under some of those scores and what might be driving some of those, the ways in which people have responded to those questions. So it's really quite at that micro level. And we're working with teams to do the state of the team tool in terms of helping them identify a team goal where they can start to aim their strengths collectively for a team goal, or we ask them to work on a particular question that they're interested in enhancing the scoring, and they together as a collective come up with some actions that they're going to do to try and drive that engagement. So it is really at that detailed level with the team.
So are you training the managers and then the managers are going into the teams and running these, or are you, how are you making that work?
Yeah, so part of that 12-week process is about 4 or 5 sessions with the manager. Again, part of the strategy was that we want to build manager capacity. And so we are investing most of our time ensuring that the managers feel comfortable, they can name and claim their own strengths and understand the engagement. So part of the work that we're doing in the background is working quite closely with the managers to feel comfortable to have those conversations and to understand the Q12 and the results. I think what's been really powerful, and one of the other reasons I quite like the Q12, is the way in which the questions are worded. It doesn't point to anyone in terms of my manager. And so what it does for those teams is make them realise they have some accountability to their own engagement, and they're making decisions on a daily basis about their own engagement. And so the managers are feeling much more comfortable about having those conversations, and teams are realising that they all equally contribute to engagement, as it's not just sitting on the manager. So behind the scenes, we are capacity building and supporting the managers we try and help them to lead those conversations in those workshops.
Yes, excellent. I'd love to know, with everyone is so busy, right? Everyone's job is full on, and I have a lot of clients who are in the healthcare space, and a lot of NUMs, nursing unit managers, who have 40 to 60 direct reports, and the thought of having conversations with 40 to 60 folks is tough to get their heads around. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that is complex.
You don't have to put it in a nutshell. You can have the whole rest of the show to talk about it if you need.
Look, I think they are the initial conversations that we have. So one of the first meetings we have with managers is around expectations, their expectations and our expectations. And it's usually how are we going to fit this in? Is it going to be around handover? How are we going to do it? I think because the manager has gone through the process with their management team already. Does that make sense? So we are actually finding that some of they're seeing the impact and they're seeing the power, and so they're actually facilitating us having access to the staff for that period of time. How they're navigating, particularly, and I think this is the other reason that they are quite enjoying the Q12, is that it very clearly, again, says that it's not necessarily your responsibility to give feedback and to praise people and recognise good work. And And so that, I think that's allowing them to feel like they're not having to have every single conversation. So I think that's one thing we're doing, is saying that you don't have to be the only person having conversations in this team.
Right.
That
It's more about them creating a culture where that everyone is able to do that. Right.
Yes. Yeah. That's the way in which we're approaching it. Absolutely. And that's really actually quite liberating, I find, for the nursing unit managers, to be able to know that their role is to foster that and encourage that and reinforce it, but they don't need to be having those conversations. The challenge comes when it's to things like performance reviews and those performance conversations, which they have to have. But what some of the managers are actually telling us is staff are actually now really excited about those rather than resenting them. And so it's making the conversation different at those meetings.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we're in the process of next year, early next year, we will be rolling out the 5 key conversations. And some of the managers that we've tested that with and had some conversation with were initially like overwhelmed that they had to go from 1 conversation to 5. But when they had a look what's at under that, are quite interested in doing it. So I don't think we've taken the work away in terms of those performance conversations, but we've kind of tried to say it's not your responsibility to be always being the one that's giving all those other elements that sit within the Q12.
For those who don't know, can you tell them a bit about the 5 conversations, or are you comfortable with that?
No, that's fine. So it's the 5 conversations. It really is around. So for me, it's around supporting managers, around having for the employees about having those critical conversations. So one is around setting expectations in terms of expectations both ways. What do I expect to get? What do I need from you? And that being maybe at the start of employment, but something that happens probably as a maybe every 2 years, every one, or as priorities change, and helping managers actually have that conversation and structuring that for them has been, for the ones we're tested it out with, has been quite powerful. The other, there's some ones around check-ins. So just having quick 5 or 10 minute check-ins, but really focusing that on people's well-being rather than performance. We've really targeted that around how are you going? How are you? Is everything okay? Are you adapting? Are things going well for you in terms of your well-being? So that's the check-in conversations. And then there's other conversations that are around development coaching. So that's the other thing that the NUMs were quite anxious about, shifting the way they engage with their staff. So having those coach-like conversations rather than sort of this manager-employee conversation has been a real shift. So it encourages people to have those touch points of those developmental coaching conversations with staff, and then we're incorporating our annual performance review as one of those key conversations. But again, what people are saying now that they've got the touch points with people and they've got some structure in the way in which they're engaging with their staff, that they're finding that end process of sort of the formal process comes together much easier, and the staff are also really engaged with it.
Yeah, excellent. That's excellent. Jim, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. So for me, actually, do you find that those conversations are easier because they have this common language that they speak now, so to speak, and to go way back to a callback to the conversation we had a little bit earlier in the show? Do you find those manager conversations, or are you getting any feedback that those manager conversations are easier because there's something to talk about, and that's them, right? And they have this language to talk about. Are you getting any feedback like that?
Yeah, absolutely positive, like lots of feedback along that. Some staff are still struggling, but I think a lot what I get back really strongly, and particularly when we work with the managers in that 12 weeks, we're giving them tools to have conversations with their staff about each other's 5 strengths and what the commonalities are and what the rubs might be. And every single one of those managers, without exception, that I've been working with, is saying to me, it's so easy. I found it so much more relaxing to have a conversation about basement this is what do you think maybe you might be in your basement, or how do we help you get to your balcony, was so much easier for them to have, and so much easier for the staff to receive. Because they were able then to go, oh, so maybe that's what it looks like, and have a conversation that didn't feel defensive. It's not, we're not hitting the mark in every single case, absolutely, but the feedback overwhelmingly is that common language is so critical for having those really difficult conversations sometimes.
We have found, and one second, let me just say this real quick. We have found oftentimes giving people permission to ask what other people's top 5 are again, and not necessarily have it memorized, but in the middle of a conversation, just say, hey, wait a minute, tell me what your top 5 are, to get a refresh, right? And then to say, when I met you today and you were saying your top 5 and you said you had empathy and communication in there, and I went, ooh, and you and I could have had a conversation about that, right? Very, very quickly. We'd known each other maybe 10 minutes. You're not a direct report to me or the other way around. But that would still give us some clues, right, to be able to have those conversations. I probably get the feeling those kinds of conversations are now happening in your organization, where people are discovering those little tidbits about someone and saying, ooh, let's talk about that some more. Do you find that kind of happening?
Yeah, look, I'd say actually that is one of the most, I get so much joy out of hearing those stories. I see it in just, meetings, and people will say, do you think you're achievers in your way? Like, they actually use the language, or people writing to me and saying, that I self-regulated on my communication, and I stopped talking, and it was amazing what happened. So it's really, I have to say, I remember talking way back when we first started engaging Gallup, that they were talking about a common language, and I kind of thought, oh yeah, that's important. I can see that that's important. Never underestimate the power of that common language. It is, and with 500 staff now doing it, I'm starting to see people go, how do I get in? How do I actually become a part of that language? And I see people correcting each other all the time, like, no, that's not your achiever, I think that's your arranger. And then they have a conversation. You're absolutely right, Jim. And it's really fostering a conversation at a different level than was happening before.
It's great because we see with clients when they get to a certain point that instead of being fearful that, oh my goodness, I have 40 to 60 direct reports, how am I going to have these conversations? They start to realize that strengths language and Q12 and things like the 5 conversations are all accelerants, right? They're all, whether it's through relational shorthand, which is another term that we use when we're talking about strengths, so that you can understand those sort of shortcuts, to understanding that when you're talking about Q12, it's really about you're helping managers understand where they should be focusing their energy. And when they have limited time for conversations, these are the items that we know through our research are linked to higher engagement levels and higher performance. So if you have a limited amount of time, you want to make it that time, those conversations, most powerful. And actually, we created the 5 conversations that you were referring to through work that we did with the Department of Defense in the US, where we were trying to really be able to understand how can we make this manager's time really impactful when it's so limited, and across all various types of situations and circumstances, and being able to understand that if you're able to have the setting up the expectations on one side, the performance accountability on the other side, and those quick check-ins as you pass in the hall or in the lift lobby or what have you, that actually accelerates the relationship and the success in working together as individuals and teams. So suddenly you realize that these conversations you were afraid that you wouldn't have time to have actually makes life much easier, and it makes things progress and work so much better.
Absolutely. And I think we are seeing that time and time again. We are trying to look at some way to get some analytics on that, because it's when it's working, it's so powerful and it's so obvious, but sometimes it's really hard to demonstrate that. But absolutely, that's what we're seeing.
We can help you with that. From a technology perspective, do you find that Gallup Access is something that you use, and how, and if so, how do, beyond just looking at your reports and results from Q12, do you use the resources that are there, the learning resources and action planning and that sort of thing?
Yeah, we do. So I will often go in and get some learning resources, particularly if something specific comes up in a workshop or I get a specific question. So I'm constantly reading those things, but I do send a lot of stuff out to the people that we're working with, particularly if it's come up as a piece of interest. Let's just be honest, analytical is quite low for me, and as your discipline. So, but my offsider is really into Gallup Access, and she does lots of she pulls lots of information for us that we're actually reporting against. So while we're doing things at quite a local level with the Q12, we're keeping the executive and the board updated in terms of the sort of the cumulative mean scores across the board, and we're able to represent that data. So we're using the data that sits in Gallup Access. It's been that having the capability to manage that. So, you know, if I would like to do a new team's come on board and we need to do their Q12, the ability to do that quickly and have ownership of that is really, really so helpful. So it streamlines so many things.
Yeah, and we see that the digital learning modules are super useful as well. So you do those workshops, but then people can go on and they can kind of get that continuous drip feed of knowledge so that they, you know, it really helps them learn. I imagine we're getting close to being out of time. So Jim, quick question, Michelle, what about in education? Are you bringing it into education at all? Into your lecturing at the University of New South Wales? And while you're answering that, I'm going to plug in my laptop before it dies.
No, not so much at the University of New South Wales. That is not really there. But I, in terms of the organisation, though, I think that's the one thing where we can actually start to demonstrate some return on investment for us, because we've been able to, as in changing our performance development review process to start having a strengths approach, which is very different to what it was, which was in terms of that weakness fixing, which was around what don't you do very well and what do you need to make sure you can do better. So that real shift to that strength lens. What we've been able to actually do is to start to look at how we invest in people's education and training. And so whereas before it was quite remedial, we were plugging people into remedial programs to fix something, or trying to get people better at doing something that didn't align with them, or it wasn't anything they were ever going to excel at. We've been able to really start to target our education and training and invest in what people do well and what people really want to do better at. And that's been a real game changer for us in terms of the way we're delivering training, and we're aligning our performance development review with our education and training program.
It's a great answer. And while we bring Anne back, Beverly had asked a question. We'll kind of wrap on this one. Is there accountability built in for working Q12 action items and their outcomes at the team level? Have you guys built in any accountability there for that?
Yeah, so as part of the way we're running it out at the moment is after we're finished working with those teams, we will do a 6-month pulse check to see if they've made any difference on the items that they were working on. So there's an accountability in terms of we do a pulse check. And what we're working with is looking at how do we start to put the outcomes of those Q12s into performance agreements. Yeah, there's always a risk when you put stuff like that into performance agreements, though. So I'm walking on the line on that one, but we definitely do check measures.
We ask on our own Q12 here at Gallup, have you made any progress on your Q12? And it's actually a score that gets beat up pretty bad sometimes, because we'll get busy with the business of being busy. And then, you're like, oh yeah, we kind of committed to some Q12 items that we need to come back to collectively as a group. I do think oftentimes in work teams, if it's a persistent problem, it's going to get addressed. Sometimes we look for things like, oh, it'd be great if we could do more of this. And it really wasn't that big of a problem that the priority comes up. And action items don't necessarily do anything unless they're needed, right?
That's right.
At that
Absolutely.
point to do stuff. So,
yeah.
Well, Michelle, thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it on behalf of Ann. We'll see if she can jump back in here in a second. But on behalf of Ann, it does. I really appreciate you taking the time today to be a part of this. You kind of gave a clinic on Strengths and Q12. There's a lot of great work being done in this region of the country. You guys are a big organization and are doing it very, very well. And you gave us kind of a little bit of a clinic on that. So thank you for spending the time doing that, for answering. These are really hard questions. And by the way, becoming a strength-based culture is not an easy thing to do. Really fun to say. Even harder to do. If you think there was one thing you could do better, and what I'm kind of thinking from a strengths-based approach is, what are you doing well that you wish you were doing even more of or doing even better? What do you think that one thing is that you guys are doing really, really well that you just wish you could do more of?
Personally, at this point, for me, it's around demonstrating the impact. I wish we could take it outside of being much more anecdotal and much more visible. But I think what we're doing really well, and I would like to continue, is really working with teams. I think that's been really powerful to get in there and work with their context, with their culture, with their issues. And I wish we could do that ongoingly. Yeah.
Well, good news. I didn't set you. This was not on purpose, by the way, but good news. You say you listen to Call to Coach and Theme Thursday. We have a whole bunch of teams content coming out first half of next year of 2020. So you heard it here first. We haven't talked about that anywhere, but we are excited to launch some new team stuff coming up here in 2020. And I thanked Michelle. Any final words before we let her go?
Anything that we should have asked that we didn't, Michelle? Any last words?
No, I don't think so. But thank you so much for inviting me to talk today. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your story. We appreciate it.
Very good. With that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available. We mentioned it, Ann mentioned a little bit earlier on the new Gallup Access platform. Won't be new too much longer. If you want to get access to that, gallup.com/CliftonStrengths. We'll get you there. Send us your questions or comments. You can send us an email. Coaching@gallup.com is the right way to do that. And we appreciate the emails you do send to us. If you want to watch this video again, or if you want to know, hey, we've got hundreds of these available. Michelle was kind enough to say that on the program today. You can go to our YouTube channel, just youtube.com, and then search Clifton Strengths, or in any podcast player. And then all the cool kids are listening to podcasts these days. You could too. Just search Gallup Webcast, and you'll see any of the 7 webcasts that we have available out there for you, including Call to Coach and Theme Thursday. If you're interested in becoming a Gallup Certified Strengths Coach, you can see a list of all the courses that lead to that on our courses page. And any courses coming up that you want to highlight real quick?
We're having 2 accelerated strength coaching courses first week of December, 2nd to the 6th. We've had to open up a second course. So 2 running the same week. And then also, I think a Clifton Strengths Discovery Train the Trainer later on that same week. Or the next week. So yes, lots. And have you talked about Gallup at Work, Jim?
Haven't. You want to say something real quick?
Yeah. Well, if you want to, I don't know, you probably know more about it than I do at this point, but are we set for June? Is that
we are June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd here in Omaha, and GallupAtWork.com. I think we'll get you, and I think it's GallupAtWork.com will get you our summit, right? Summit offering that's there. We'd love to see you here. And now is the time to buy tickets. So they will go up in price on January 3rd. So you might want to take advantage of those before the $100 increase goes in. Last thing, join us on our Facebook group, facebook.com/call2coach. Love to have you out there. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for everybody who's in the chat room today. Some really great questions. We'll see you on the next Call to Coach. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.